Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wrestling Spotlight. I am your host, the man, the myth, the legend, the franchise, the monopoly that is Micky Byggs. And today, my guest is a former NWA President, owner of the former NWA Wildside, the man behind SBI Bookings, booking some of the biggest names in pro wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Behrens. Bill, welcome to Wrestling Spotlight.
Thank you very much.
So, as I said, former NWA President, head of the NWA Wildside, man behind SBI Bookings. Is there anything that you don't do in the industry?
There's probably a number of things I haven't done in the industry, but those are some of the things I've done in the past. I've had a fairly long career in wrestling now, although I didn't start in wrestling. I sort of started as a fan like most people and had a career as a television syndicator for a couple of decades and slid into wrestling because I was helping wrestling people get their TV shows on television.
Yeah, very good, very good. Now, how did you end up doing the NWA Wildside and then becoming the NWA President, essentially?
Originally, I'd been working with USWA, Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler's company, helping with their TV and doing various other things for the company. And the company was sold, and the people that bought it ended up putting it out of business within 3 months. At the time, I was under contract to WWE. As part of that contract, they sublet USWA show, paid me a fee, and put their commercials in it and distributed it. That was part of the deal. All of a sudden, USWA didn't exist, and I had to come up with a show. It was Monday, and I needed a show by Wednesday. Jerry Jarrett suggested that I communicate with Bert Prentice, who I had met briefly at USWA as he was promoting some of the house shows.
Okay.
And Bert and I went into business and set up a company called Music City Wrestling that eventually became NWA Worldwide when, I want to say 98, could have been 97, I ended up joining the NWA originally as the member for the area, Nashville, over toward the east, and that was my original area. Then after a period of time of working in Nashville and doing about 100 television shows with Bert, I decided I was tired of driving back and forth over the mountain from Atlanta to get to Nashville, so I started promoting Georgia. At first, there was another guy that was NWA Georgia guy, a very weird guy named Moose Lewis. Moose's most recent venture, for example, was announced several years ago and covered by major news companies. It announced an all-white basketball league because he felt that white folk were being held back by the black folk in terms of basketball.
Wow.
So interesting guy. But without a lot of detail on him, his thing didn't work out. I booked his first shows. If whatever could go bad did. He ended up quitting the NWA. I ended up picking up Georgia and started promoting there. Went into business relatively soon after, probably 6 months after that, and in 1998, with a company that had been established in Cornelia, Georgia, called NCW, that was run by Ray Rawls and Steve Martin, not the other guy. And they wanted me to help them because they were aware that Music City Wrestling and NWA Worldwide had been and were still television in over 50% of the country, including on television in Atlanta, where they had watched the show. We had a fairly large distribution. So I went into business with them, came to an arrangement where I came in as a partner with them retaining all the revenues basically out of the live promotion and me handling all the television side and producing all the TV shows. As time passed, I ended up eliminating both of them as partners. One was bought out by the other, and then I bought out the other one after a while, and I eventually became the sole owner of NWA Wildside. Survived 5.5 years or more, I think 5, 6 years. Produced 300 plus hours of television during that time, and helped develop quite a few of the stars that are right now being seen major television shows. Probably the biggest of those is my client AJ Styles. So that's the short version of the story. Also, for a period of time, Wildside and myself worked with WCW under contract. I had a WWE contract, and then I transferred over to WCW, then back to WWE, and then back to WCW in various roles. And in the second of those WCWs, I was running their development system out of my company in Cornelia, Georgia. they were sending their young stars to be developed. Shannon Moore, Shane Helms, Denise Bob Sapp, Jendrak O'Hare, it goes on and on. All the guys that were young that were in there were coming in and working in my small building in an effort to get them more ring time and to do the things that it was hard to be taught when you're young and being put right out on the road, just having to perform. Hard to learn in that process. So they were required to come into our promotion to learn more. And then Wildside went out of business inevitably in 2005 when WWE hired me to help set up Deep South Wrestling, which was going to be their development facility in Georgia. And it was for a dismal 2 years. I stayed only 3 months because the various partners WWE decided needed to be there, myself, Billy DeMott, and Jody Hamilton, with Jody and myself in theory being in charge, didn't play well together as it turned out, and I was in a position where the job I was hired to do, I really couldn't well. So it was easier for me to leave them, and I had been with TNA before that, and I went back to TNA in another role after that, and so those are bits and pieces of my limited history.
Okay, now, I mean, you said you went with, TNA, you've done WWE, WCW, NWA. In your opinion, what was the highlight of your career as far as working? Which one was, the best one working for, whether it be TNA, WCW, WWE, or NWA?
In terms of fun, I probably had the most fun making no money at all in the earliest years of TNA when we were running out of the small building that we called the Asylum. I had promoted that building for 2 years with Burt Prentice, the Nashville Fairgrounds. That was an area I was really familiar with, and we were like a little train that could in trying to get up the hill. Everything was stacked against the company's seating. Everybody thought it was going to go out of business. So, and I was given as there were only a few of us with experience in the, management side, although I was on the lowest end of that. We all had to multitask. Everybody was doing 12 jobs. Jeremy Barash was not only one of the announcers, but he was the primary editor, for example. Jeff Jarrett and his ex-wife and his late wife Jill were literally painting the sets, and with Ron Harris and Don Harris building the sets, in between all of the shows just to keep going. And I was booking the Explosion television show, which allowed me to bring in a lot of independent guys. And at the same time, whether it was a conflict or not, I was first a vice president of the National Wrestling Alliance, and then during second or third year of TNA's existence, I was for a year the president of the organization. After that, we eliminated the president job and had an executive director, our attorney Bob Trobich, as a director, which was at that point an advisory position. So I was involved with the NWA from 98 till 2012. Yeah, 2012, when we added some members who decided they wanted the company for themselves, I guess.
Now, you said that you were with TNA and NWA right around that same time frame as far as when TNA was part of the NWA and representing the world titles, etc. Can you give us any information on, what happened, why all of a sudden did NWA drop the TNA or TNA drop the NWA, however that worked out exactly?
Well, the original deal came about, Jim Miller at the time was our NWA president, I was the vice president, and I had, if you go back to where I started, a relationship with the Jarretts, going back to when Jerry first contacted me back in 1993 to come help him at USWA. The original job was to help his son become a promoter. Inevitably, it was a job Jeff didn't want to do at the time, but it developed with me doing more and more with the company regardless. So as they began, spin forward to 2002, nearly a decade later, I've been in communication with Jerry frequently, not so much Jeff, but they got in touch with me. I had sent David Young versus AJ Styles as a match for them to watch Nashville. We'd communicated about that, and they basically AJ and David were probably the first two people signed to the company. AJ actually signed his contract while on a tour. He and I and Jeff Jarrett were on for WWA. Went to Australia to do a pay-per-view that preceded TNA. I've been talking to Jerry one time, and just out of nowhere, I said, "Would you guys have any interest in using the NWA brand?" Said, "Think they, your guys would want that?" I said, "Why not? The worst thing that happens is they vote it down and say no, but I just see an upside. I don't see a downside." And inevitably, we got with Jeff's attorney and Bob and myself and Jim involved. We came to an initial agreement that really didn't involve any fees or anything like that. It was more or less, let's try for a year to see how this thing works out. You guys spend your money to promote our brand was our part of the deal. That's what NWA got. They ended up getting the right to book and control at some level the NWA World Heavyweight title and the NWA Tag Team titles, and we gave them permission to create a new NWA title that was called the X Division title. We would then continue to book all of the other various titles. We had the junior title, the various other regional titles, national title, North American title, and so on. So that was the original plan. Eventually, they wanted to renew. We decided we wanted to renew. There was another negotiation. This was after, actually, I was asked not to participate in the negotiation, but then I was asked to go to all the meetings with. But anyway, but we ended up with a deal that involved a fee that was going to be paid to sublet the brand that could have gone as much as 10 years. It went, 3 or 4 years, and our members, some, not all, began bitching that, we're not getting the right to use the champions, and they're not, that we don't know what they're doing, and it's holding us back, and blah, 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 blah. And I think smarter TNA, I'm sure at one point had to have at least a meeting or two, because I would have, where they went, okay, we're trying to establish a brand called TNA. And we also have this brand called NWA, a sanctioning body with some historical relevance that sort of helped us with some credibility, and we certainly helped it. But inevitably, people aren't chanting NWA at our shows. They're chanting TNA. Inevitably, we don't have to share TNA with anybody, but we do have to share NWA with these other idiots. So why are we hanging on to the NWA brand in terms of the real forward momentum growth of the company? It was a nice way to get started, and it certainly helped perpetuate some of the legacy of the NWA, and a lot of great champions were TNA stars during that time, including AJ, Jeff Jarrett, Ron Killings, Raven, just a good group of people carried that belt during the period. And quite honestly, probably, if not definitely, a better group of stars than we could have independently found. Prior to that, our champion, and a good one, had been Danny Severin and every once in a while Steve Corino and Sabu at one point, and Mike Rapata. We also had Noyo Gawa and Gary Steele, a guy from the UK. But, as I mentioned, those last 5 people, certainly Steve Corino, talented guy, well-known, but, he's been all over the business, but has never really been to the show. Never been to WWE, never been, he was briefly in TNA at the very, very beginning. Didn't go to WCW. Sabu, of course, ECW, and had moments in WWE and other places, but might not be some people's ideal of the perfect NWA champion. Danny Severin was probably the most credible champion we had, just because he's a legitimate fighter, much as Kenny Shamrock, TNA's first champion, was. And we got a lot of international press with him going over and working Japan shows and the title being dropped back and forth there. But we weren't, I think if you look at the 2 lists and you look at the 5 people we had that preceded the 5 or 6 people TNA put on, the only guy that was sort of a newbie was AJ Styles, and I don't think anybody doubts at this point that he's not one of the biggest stars in the business, and quickly. Jeff Jarrett, certainly a credible champion. Raven, a credible champion. Kenny Shamrock, credible. Ronnie Killings, the first African-American NWA champion. So there was, I think, a lot of very positive things that happened with the NWA-TNA relationship, but eventually the priorities of each simply grew aside. I think our decision, the NWA decision to get out of the deal, was more stupid than theirs. I think we were benefiting very highly. We were getting paid a fee. We had high visibility. And the bitching that we couldn't book the champions as much as we'd like really didn't mean anything because our guys didn't book the champions when we made them. And we ask our guys to pay $300 or $500 plus an airplane ticket and a hotel room to book anybody. They about passed out. So it wasn't like it was going to happen that often anyway. Our guys, one of the things that I found in the NWA, with the greater number of members we had, and at one point we just had way too many people that were actual members, and not all of them were really very good at what they were doing or were productive to the overall growth of the brand. And primarily what they enjoyed doing was just stirring it or bitching. We spent more time doing nothing than an organization should. And I think that also frustrated TNA because they had to deal with us. And dealing with a bunch of idiots, after a while you get tired of it. TNA has to deal with its own idiots. They don't need another group of idiots to deal with. So I think TNA made the right decision. We got a buyout, so it didn't hurt us. Allowed us to have a new champion and have the finances to do that, and off we went. In fact, the first champion coming out of that was supposed to be Brian Danielson, except he got injured, had to go in another direction last minute. So I think it was a good relationship for everybody involved for the period of time, but it was smart, I think, for TNA to move on and start to put more of a shine on its brand, the TNA brand, because inevitably that's the one they own solely and the one they control solely.
Right. So basically you were getting a bunch of the promoters using the NWA name, and basically they were just complaining about the fact they couldn't.
Well, it was the membership, not just people using the brand, because we had people underneath the different members using the brand. Those people really weren't complaining. The people who complained were our members, and it was usually the members that never would have booked the champion anyway, but simply wanted to bitch about something.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They probably never booked them, never would book them, but they're going to complain about it just because of the fact that they could book them if they wanted to, but never did. We
had a rich history in the NWA of taking 2 steps backward for every step forward during the time I was there. It was a frustrating organization to be part of, and at times I used to wake up at times when I was, various times we'd be having these stupid arguments. And some of our people like to argue like politicians. And
right.
If you know what I mean by that, politicians don't present fact. Politicians make statements as if they're fact.
Exactly.
This is not going to, it doesn't matter what your opinion is, but for example, they will say Barack Obama is clearly a Muslim sympathizing with our worst enemies who is determined to kill all of us.
Right.
And somebody will make that statement. It doesn't mean you have to like Obama or not, but if that statement is made enough, then eventually some news service puts that out and goes, well, clearly, he's a Muslim. He wasn't even born in this country. He shouldn't, and none of these things are facts. But because you say it, so we would constantly have arguments, and I think it was just entertaining to some of our members to do it. They had nothing better to do because wrestling was not really their business. It was mine, which is frustrating.
Right.
For a lot of our guys, they were just sort of in the wrestling on the side. So when we had the meetings, it was, well, the only reason Bill's doing this is that he's trying to do this, and he's trying to do that, and he's going to do this, and he's going to do. The next thing you know, you're fighting. So I'd wake up in the morning like hundreds of emails, and one of the kids who I've helped develop, Mike Posey, a referee for WWE, who then for TNA, and is now a wrestler for Ring of Honor, and will be returning to TNA and doing some ref spots soon. Talented kid. He was over one time, and he heard me just bitching at the computer, and one of the smartest statements ever made is he just walked over and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Look at all this shit. I got 100 emails. I'm never going to be able to answer all these." He said, "Just delete them." Inevitably, that became how I had to deal with the NWA. There was an awful lot of deleting to deal with those people. And while what happened to the NWA was unfortunate, I don't miss now the NWA being out of my life. I think NWA offered an opportunity for me to promote the brand, which I wanted to do because I grew up with it. But I think also that, and directly I helped maintain and grow the brand during the period of time we had it. As I said to somebody when it was inevitable that we're going to not have the same NWA going forward, it was going to be a bunch of other people doing whatever they wanted to with it, or actually a couple of Texas doing what they want with it. I recalled the fact that Jerry Jarrett at one time was a member of the NWA and he couldn't get the champion in to defend against Jerry Lawler. So he quit.
Right.
Joined the AWA. And then he tried to buy the AWA, and Vern wouldn't sell it unless he gave, Jerry gave his son Greg a full-time job. And Jerry didn't want to have Greg anywhere around, so that deal didn't go through, so Jerry went and did something else. Jerry was brought into the NWA by his mentor, Eddie Graham. I grew up watching Eddie Graham's Florida Championship Wrestling.
Right.
Jerry learned from Eddie Graham, as did Dutch Mantell. I learned from Jerry and Dutch Mantell. And inevitably, with the NWA, I had to go back to what I learned. And what I learned was Jerry, like me, had a great fondness for the NWA brand. It had a lot of emotional connection. But if it became something you really couldn't play with effectively, better to let it go than to let it drag you down. We got to keep forward momentum. Inevitably, it's just three letters. The three letters only are as valuable as what you do with them.
Exactly. It's true. I remember growing up, before I got into this business, watching the NWA and the National Wrestling Alliance champions, and meaning, at that time it was Ric Flair and Sting and all them. Then 22 years ago, I got into the business, trained by Ox Baker, and I found out a long time ago that I was better behind the microphone than I was in the ring, so I tend to, go to this side of things now. But what really bothers me as somebody that is in the business, that's a wrestler, that's a commentator, that does journalism, is the fact that for years and years and years, everybody assumed that NWA was gone, dead, buried, because WCW came on TV and replaced NWA. And what I say to all those people is, you've got to look at the history of the NWA. It's not just about WCW. It wasn't just about Greg Crockett Promotions. It was, NWA was an umbrella corporation with all these other companies underneath them. I said, NWA is a history that goes back to 1948, as far as that is concerned. But it goes on even beyond that, years and years and years beyond that. And what's your take on the people that say that, NWA is dead, and because WCW came on board?
Depends on you can't argue the point, because if it's the same argument as wrestling's not like it used to be.
Agreed.
And people will say wrestling's not like it used to be, and you'll land your point. Movies used to be in black and white, then they were in color, then they had quadraphonic sound, then they were digital, then they were in high def. Then everything evolves and changes. Entertainment is a changing medium. And in the midst of all the change, also, the quantity of entertainment opportunities went up. So if you begin looking at, well, it's not like it used to be. Well, yeah, back when the NWA was in its prime, there were multiple promoters around the world, each of them using the brand as part of the NWA then. That was because in most of those towns, there were 3 or 4 TV stations at the most. Wrestling was a product, local programming, much like local news, where people wanted it on and would pay to have it on. They'd pay to get the show produced. Jerry Jarrett was paid $78,000 a year, $1,500 a week. Paid let WMC in Memphis produce the show, and then Jerry was able to take the tape that they paid for and syndicate it, and if he was able to make any more money off of that, it was okay. Also, he was able to use that tape to go around and promote Louisville, Evansville, Nashville, and Jonesboro, and all the other spot towns around that. So, that was how the deals were. The stations were paying fees, paying to produce the show, and the promoters were getting the ability to use the show to promote their live events. So It was a totally different business. By the time Crockett really got, and you're talking Crockett Jr., not Crockett Sr., by the time Crockett Jr. got involved, various things were already happening or in works. Vince Jr. was in the process of sending his sales guy, Joe, all over the place to start going to stations and going, this fee you're paying, what if weren't doing that? And instead we gave you a show for free that's still wrestling, and we brought the wrestling to town. So now you don't have to produce anything, you don't have to spend any money, and you get a TV show. That was going on, and it was successful. And simultaneously, Crockett, over time, was finding a way to get rid of the last people that still had companies. Fritz von Erich's company was starting to implode as his kids were dying right and left. Bill Watts finally sold out, got for $1 million or $2 million, and basically all that Crockett got for that TV distribution that was duplicative on what he already had, so it was valueless. And he also got some rings, because wrestling companies really are only the hardware. There's very little that's tangible in a wrestling company. Why, whenever anybody says they were able to sell a wrestling company, you almost have to giggle. And the only other thing he got was a bunch of wrestlers that were hoping they still were going to be, like Larry Zbyszko, the Western Heritage Champion. Hopefully he's going to still have a deal, when the thing happens, because even the contracting was loosey-goosey. So by the time all that was going on, and Crockett was on TBS after the aborted WWE takeover of TBS, there were still NWA members, but it had gotten to so few, and they were so weak, and Crockett was so strong. Whatever he did was the NWA until Bob Trowbridge in 2005 filed a lawsuit because the then champion Rick Rude wasn't being allowed to defend the title for one of the still surviving members, the late Dennis Carluzzo, up in New Jersey. And inevitably, the NWA won the right to its brand. And at that point, WCW did what probably it should have done, much like TNA. It began focusing on WCW rather than NWA. It realizing, well, that's the brand, really. The brand that we can sell, because the NWA, we have partners. Partners, and they're going to want some. So you get rid of those people. Now it's just WCW. Whoever owns WCW, that's the asset. And then the NWA was down to 5 members. Dennis, Steve Ricard, I think Victor Quinones, and a couple others. I forget who. Howard Brody joined. Then in 96 to 97 started, Howard just went on a buying spree of promoters, basically. I knew Howard because we had interacted back in my Smoky Mountain time, and got in touch with me primarily because I had distribution in over 50 million households. So I was TV boy. One of the late promoters, a promoter out of New England, Tony Rumble.
Oh yes, I know him very well. I know his son very well because that's who I used to work for, Jason Rumble.
When Tony, not quite son, but he carries.
Yes, I know.
He carries the name proudly. Tony used to call me Southern Fried Sabaldi, which meant basically that he was comparing me with Mario Sabaldi, someone not fond of. Mario, a legitimate wrestling guy for various reasons, and in my eyes, I was the same version of that guy. I was some guy from the TV business who didn't know his, a wristwatch from a wristwatch and shouldn't, be in wrestling because it wasn't a full-time gig. I think, by the way, Tony would be proud of me now because I am now and have been for over a decade solely in the wrestling business. There are very few of us that are solely in the wrestling business.
Ain't that the truth, brother?
Most promoters do wrestling as a sideline. Most wrestlers do wrestling as a weekend hobby. And there's just only a few of us that are able to say this is how we make our living. And and that's a much smaller list of people than you think it is, while there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, not potentially hundreds of thousands worldwide, of people that will say they're in the wrestling business. are a much more narrow cast of characters that can say, this is how I pay my bills.
Yep, exactly. Okay. We talked about the NWA. We talked about all your other stuff that you've done in your past. SBI Bookings, like I said in your introduction, booking some of the biggest names in the industry today. Before we let you go, would you mind giving us some insight on the people that you do book and how they can go about, the fans can go about, getting someone booked for whatever reason they need to get somebody booked for?
So my website is www.sbishowbusinessinc, SBI Bookings, and that's at the end.com. And I have two jobs relating to that overall umbrella as it relates to the talent side. I develop talent and represent a lot of young guys that I don't make any money off of because they don't make any money. And hopefully someday they'll make money and then I can make money too. But there's no, I don't sign any of those, when you make it, kid, I get 10% of your, one of those usurious contracts that, the Roland Alexanders of the world had on a special. But what I do basically is for some people I act simply as a booking agent. So for a Kevin Nash or DDP or the Steiners or Tommy Dreamer or, any number of folk that I'm supposed to work with, I'm just the person that more often than not they tell the promoter to deal with so that they don't have to deal with the idiot promoter. Then there's a category of people whose careers I manage. That would be people like Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles as me. And with them, I'm doing more than just booking them. It's a wider job. Negotiating contracts, I'm doing other things. Whereas, and I do consult with the other guys on contracts, but that's more on spot-to-spot basis. But, in essence, with a Kevin Nash, I quote the price he wants quoted. I get the terms he wants. I collect the deposit for him. I take 10%. He gets the money, and he doesn't have to worry about the detail. The hardest part of my job and the biggest problem they have is promoters are always of the mind that if they can get the stupid wrestler on the phone, a lot of promoters just like to talk to the wrestlers. Feel like they're in the business. It's, oh boy, I'm on the phone with Kevin Nash. It's cool. But the greater problem is that they believe the wrestlers are so desperate for the job that they can nickel and dime them or get away with silly things and they aren't going to get caught. Now, for the guys, that happens. There are times where a wrestler will be so unusually patient that when the promoter comes back and he says, oh, by the way, I got your flight and, you're going from Atlanta to New York and you're connecting through two cities because it saved me $20, and the wrestler goes, oh, okay. All right, fine with me. And nickel and dime stupidity. Also, many promoters have the feeling that the prices are jacked up by the agent because that's how the agent gets paid, which is, of course, a total misunderstanding of how a real agent works. A real agent takes his money from the client, not from the promoter. The promoter doesn't pay me at all. I don't make a dime from a promoter. I make my money from the wrestler. So if I quote whatever the number is, let's make up numbers. Let's say I quote $5 for Kevin Nash, which is obviously a good deal. And the promoter comes back and he says, oh, I can't do $5. I mean, geez, I barely draw here. While you're going with it, why the hell are you booking this guy? But anyway, so then he goes, well, I can do $3. Well, then it's my job to go back to Kev and go, Kev, he can do $3. And then Kev goes, no, I don't want to do $3, but I'll do $4, but remind him I have to do first class air and I need at least a 4-star hotel. I need something with room service. And I got to fly out of Daytona Beach and it better be Delta. And so then I go back to the guy and, it's this. And then that's the game. That's the process.
Yep.
Decisions are all made on my end by the wrestler, not by me. So anytime a promoter works with me, the decision to take the offer or not, or what the amount of money quoted or not, comes from the wrestler. On the opposite side of that, promoters get unusually grumpy if you quote them a price they think is too high, and I have to constantly remind them, hey guys, you have all the power here because there's literally nobody forcing you to do a damn thing. Nobody says you have to book a star, spend thousands of dollars, and not make it back at your gate.
Yep, exactly.
Nobody tells you to do that. You have the ability, if I say Kevin Nash wants $5 frickin' and he isn't going to come in for a penny more, don't get mad at me. So I can't pay that, and then be happy with your answer. So that's the process going through. Hopefully the message I could deliver is, almost without exception, the people who work with me find that the booking goes smoothly and that the talent is happier and easier to deal with. That things that normally are difficult become easy. The rare group of people that have had problems booking talent with me are usually the people that have problems anyway, that will hope they make money at the gate to pay what they said they were paying to the wrestlers. What was called a guarantee becomes, hey, my gate wasn't good, will you take this instead? Rather than, here's the $75 I told you. Because, those kind of promoters, there's no way to make that guy happy because he's just running as fast as he can. And inevitably, people ask all the time, who do you recommend that will draw a good house? And then I confuse them by going, nobody. No one wrestler or group of wrestlers draws a house. The correct promotion of any one wrestler or group of wrestlers will draw a house.
There you go.
Promotion is always the key.
Yep.
Michael Lombardi up in Connecticut, is one of those guys that, I set up a thing with schools. He babysits them well. He just had Matt Hardy, AJ Styles, Vader, the King, had Jerry Lawler all on a show a week or so ago. Drew a little over 1,800 people up in Connecticut. And he paid a good, he paid AJ's asking price, and AJ's asking price is not hundreds of dollars. It's a change. And he's also the guy that when I was charging a 5-figure number for Kurt Angle when I was booking for TNA, agreed to that and made money.
There you
as
go.
a promoter. Most people who think they're good promoters will pay thousands of dollars for stars and then do a shitty job promoting, draw a couple hundred people, and blame the stars for not drawing, rather than blaming themselves for not promoting the star.
That's the key, promoting.
So if you notice right now, rock acts, for example, some of the biggest names in the business don't go on the road alone anymore. Elton John goes on the road with Billy Joel. In my eyes, Elton John can draw on his own, and Billy Joel can draw on his own. They're both two of my favorites. But they got together and went, we can probably sell more tickets at a higher price and work less, because I'll do a short set, you do a short set, we do some stuff together, it'll be different, and we'll draw a more diversified crowd than what we would draw going out alone. So that gets packaged. If you notice, and it's been going on for years, there are very few acts that can go out alone and fill buildings all the way across their tour.
Of course not.
So they learn, well, what do we need? And then they have to have the right promoter. The promoter has to know what he's doing. You have to be able to put the butts into seats. And that's a tangible, thing. When I'm asked all the time by people that want to start a promotion, what advice I can give them, and I said, never spend more than you're going to make back at the gate. So if you can only draw 100 people at $10 a head, then how much can you spend?
Exactly. You're absolutely correct.
Jared and I used to always joke, we talk about something that might make money, and Jerry would pause and go, oh, it's a profit deal.
Oh, man. Well, I know you're a busy man, so I'm going to wrap this up. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the fans before you go?
Support wrestling, particularly good wrestling, and there is good wrestling out there on the independent level. AJ Styles made a decision to go out on his own after a long run with TNA as an example, and has drawn larger houses for every promotion he's gone to than they have in quite a while. Ring of Honor's numbers are up. A regular with them this last weekend. Sold out both buildings he was in.
Yeah, I just saw him on Ring of Honor TV, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of good going on, and with some good people that can still go out there on the indies. Chris Hero back out on the indies can go. AJ Styles is new and fresh on the indies at 36 years old. Matt Hardy is doing a great job marketing himself on the indies and has bounced back from his problems to become a top guy. Yep. And I think there's a lot of good stuff and a lot of young people that are really worth seeing. The people that I work with, the Corey Hollises, the Mike Posies, the Luke Hawkses, Kyle Matthews, Gunner, who eventually got signed, Phil Shatter before that, and it goes on and on with all of these guys, and there's a number of them all over the place. What you want to avoid are the shows you go to that are clearly low end, unless that's what you really enjoy. Usually those are identified where 95% of the guys you're watching wrestler look like they would be eating dinner with you later, in their underwear. They're fat guys in T-shirts.
There you go.
Wrestlers need to be larger than life, and that is out there on the indies, and there is the opportunity to support that. And then beyond the indies, you obviously want to support the guys that are spending the money and building the business at the top, and that would be Ring of Honor, then TNA, and then obviously the show with WWE that is being very innovative now on how they're packaging the diversified library they've been able to get, and their new internet system is going to shake things up. It's really just a modification of what we've all been doing. I mean, everybody, like when I got started, doing TV was a big deal, and not everybody could do it. So I got my reputation by being a guy that could produce TV for $1. Now anybody and their mother can go buy a digital camera and put stuff up on YouTube.
Exactly.
All you have to do is frame the ring. It's not that hard. If you can hook up a microphone, you can then do commentary. If you've got Windows Media Editing, you can even do a 2-camera edit. So there's a lot of opportunity for stuff to get out there, and we're all, even little promotions are creating greater internet content, just not at the level WWE is. So the industry that began as a live event television supported industry is now growing into a live event pay-per-view, wider marketing, bigger business potentially. I think wrestling is in a growth mode right now. Jeff Jarrett is teasing that he'll be launching a promotion very soon, and when I talked to him, he hasn't given me specifics, but one thing he did say is he was surprised at how much interest there was in wrestling in his meetings with television entities in California.
Exactly.
I believe that to be true. I've had 2 different companies come and produce pilots or what are called sizzle tapes for reality shows out of my little building over the past couple of years. So there's a lot of people knocking on the door and recognizing that wrestling and wrestlers in general, wrestling's an interesting thing. It's a willing suspension of disbelief. It's an aggressive soap opera, and wrestlers are talented athletes who are able to embrace characters and get you involved. So it is a perfect form of entertainment. It is a art form, quite literally, and we're finding more ways to realize that art form than ever before. And I think that'll challenge the young athletes to go, okay, it's not about the quantity of moves I do or how many times I flip, but it's how well can I get over a character that the crowd wants to get behind. Bryan Danielson was always a talented guy who did an awful lot of great stuff as an independent guy, but he gets up to WWE, he's the littlest guy there, and he finds a way to become one of the, if not the most popular guys in the company by saying yes.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, that guy that always had personality, and you saw it every once in a while on the indies, all of a sudden, crowds are really getting into this. Fandango, a kid who I booked back in the day, came in for me when he was on the indies, was just languishing, not doing anything until they gave him that goofy little gimmick, and now people dance the Fandango. So
exactly.
Wrestling uniquely has that ability to capture the imagination, and within a second, somebody can be a star, and wrestlers are uniquely qualified after the time most of them put in, particularly if it's the time well spent, they're uniquely qualified in going out there and getting you involved in them emotionally. Wrestling is truly reality television before reality television became, because reality television isn't real. It's manufactured reality. Wrestling is that on times two.
Yep.
Because it's more creatively generated. Reality TV is usually couched in, I yell at you, you yell at me, I cry, it's very basic.
Exactly.
Wrestling has more layers of emotion in it when it's done well. Oh, and last thing though, this is a total tangent, but I'll leave this. If there's the one thing I want people to remember, here's the one thing I do want to send out. I've had more conversations within the last year with young people starting companies where somebody gets in touch with me and identify themselves as, well, I'm the writer for our TV show. And the guy's like 22. I go, what the hell is that? I know that WWE, because they are truly a television product, has writers. But they also have wrestlers consulting with the writers. They've got Brian James or Michael Hayes. In TNA, it always has been the same thing. There's always been somebody, well, right now, less of that, quite honestly, but historically, there's been a Dutch Mantell, a guy that knows wrestling. The psychology of wrestling, how capture people's emotions is not something some kid can figure out just because he likes wrestling. If you set up a company, please don't write your show. Find a way to book compelling matchups by establishing characters and giving them something to do. The more you try to write that, the more you're forcing characters, and probably you're doing it without the experience or the ability to do it well.
Exactly.
It's booking is not matchmaking, and writing is not booking.
Yep,
booking
absolutely correct.
Is key. Matchmaking, anybody in the world can do matchmaking. I found this out writing. When I was in USWA, a guy named Mike Samples was booking at the time, and the then owners, Jerry Jarrett had sold out, and Lawler and a guy named Larry Burton were in charge of the company. I got a call from Larry, and he said, this stuff Mike Samples does really sucks. So we'll then get Samples. And, well, we told him we'd give him a chance, and we just don't want to do that right now, and blah, blah, blah. And we send you the script, and will you fix it? And I'm, 1995 or something, and I of course I've been a wrestling fan, and we all of us wrestling fans think we know everything. We're the smartest guys on the face of the earth, and we're smarter than ever before because all the news on the internet, some of which may actually be true, is now available to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we end up, I egotistically, well, yes, I can do that, and I started fixing things. Well, next thing I know, they're going, oh, this is so much better, and now I'm full of myself. I'm a freaking booker. Well, then forward about 3 weeks later probably, and Mike Samples was they found a way to, well, Mike, we want to do something else, and the something else was they wanted to bring Dutch Mantell in, not me, but Dutch Mantell. Dutch Mantell learned from Jerry Jarrett and then worked for Eddie Graham, who Jerry Jarrett had learned from. These guys were truly bookers.
Right.
They knew how to capture emotion, how to tell stories, realize characters, and make money. And I was blessed to be able to sit with Dutch and not help more than him go, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then challenge me as to why it's a good or a bad idea. That's when I started to learn how to book. Before, I was just a fan playing around, a TV guy that was imposing what I liked without really understanding what gets people involved, what makes people mad, and when do you want to make them mad, what makes people happy, and when do you want to make them happy.
Yep.
How do you get from point A to point B? Dusty Rhodes was a great booker, but there are those that have questioned some of his booking because Dusty's strength, he also learned from Eddie Graham, by the way, Dusty's strength was he was an event guy. He had a big picture brain. He saw the end game more clearly than probably any booker in the last several decades. And he branded more big name things than probably anybody ever has. Pat Patterson may come close for WWE just in matches or events. But that was Dusty. But Dusty's problem sometimes was he wasn't really sure what road to take to get there. So the damn thing went all over the place.
Gotcha.
And that was his weakness. And in fact, periodically when he was booking for Eddie Graham, Dusty would be drawing huge houses and they'd be losing money as part of that process. And that's when Eddie Graham would call Vince Sr. up in New York and go, and you could use Dusty for 5 or 6 months. And then Dusty would all of a sudden, get a phone call, and he'd go into Eddie Graham and say, Eddie, Vince Sr. says he needs me. You mind if I leave for a while? And then Eddie would take the book back and build the promotion back by telling stories the way they need to be told, to the build-offs the way they needed to be done. Because he knew how to get to where he was going. Endgame might not have been as big for Eddie Graham, but the voyage made more sense. And that's what, if I was going to counsel people in wrestling at this point, stop thinking that you need to be a WWE writer or you need to use all that phraseology that they use. Start more focusing on the simplicities of the business first before you try to overcomplicate it. If you start your company by coming to a show with a bunch of green guys and a 15-page script, you've already screwed up.
Exactly. I agree. Well, Bill, it's been a pleasure to have you on Wrestling Spotlight. I always enjoy listening to the stories of the people in this business, the legends in this business. And you, my friend, are definitely a legend in this business, at least on one aspect of it. And I'd like to thank you for, being on Wrestling Spotlight with me today.
Thank you.
Wrestling Spotlight, this has been Bill Behrens. I am the man, the myth, the legend, the franchise, monopoly that is Micky Byggs. We'll see you next time at ringside.